It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there. Getting old and senile.
Hey, Hunter! Look at that handsome boy.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah. So you look a little older than you did in Invaders from Mars.
Little bit, just a skosh.
But I love the beard. Love the beard.
Thank you. Beards are very cool.
We all got them.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have one for a really long time. I didn't have the connectors. So I was stuck in this perpetual Ethan Hawke zone for many
Yeah.
months. And finally, they just appeared one day when I stopped shaving, and there they were. So after that, I just kept my beard.
Here we go. Welcome to 10 Times the Terror. My name is Ralph Paserno.
And I'm Paul Leggett.
And with us today, we have
Hunter Carson.
Hunter Carson, and it's a real pleasure to have you on, Hunter. Hunter
Thank
Carson is a friend of ours. He's made a number of wonderful films. We're going to be discussing today 3 of his films plus a documentary that Hunter made. And I think for many of you sci-fi fans, Invaders from Mars that Hunter starred in is probably the most popular or the most beloved film. But he's done some other fine work that we have watched. And I think it's best to start with some of these other areas. And maybe I can start off asking you, Hunter, about how you got involved making that wonderful documentary on the fire asylum.
Thank you. That's a really fabulous way to start. The Fire Asylum is the name of a firefighter training company for which I had become the media director many years ago. Almost a full decade ago, I took on the job of working with these first responders and basically creating content for what they then had was a social media site where they would advertise. And so what I would do is I would basically take cameras of any kind, usually like a prosumer DSLR for those techies out there. That's we used the Canon C series. They were wonderful. And I would go through this training program called the Fire Asylum with the first responders. Now, I'm not a first responder. However, being a filmmaker, I noticed that there was a lot of meat that was storyable. There were people talking about things that they had experienced. There were people talking about things that their friends had experienced. And I got in touch with, the guy that hired me is named Marty Mays. He is a retired firefighter. And he and I talked, and we decided that if it were possible to get a group of people that were willing to be on camera, that he and I would endeavor to create some sort of documentation of this and then turn it into something that everybody could watch. That is to say, we didn't know what we were going to end up having in our hands. We just knew that there were stories that need to be told. And my filmmaker part of me, my artist part of me came out and decided that it was very important to get this message out there, get these stories told. And it took 7 years of working very hard to find the right combination of people and to get financing. And we finally did about 3-4 years ago. We worked in West Virginia with a small film crew named Ectovex. And what ended up happening was we had planned the shoot obviously months in advance, and all of a sudden this giant hurricane called Harvey approached where we live. My family lives in Houston. Now everybody else is up in West Virginia at this point, and there was no way that I could leave during this sort of catastrophe, and there was no way that I could bring them with me. Anyway, Harvey was a big deal down here, and I basically nominated the director of photography, Ryan, to be the co-director and to take over that mantle because I couldn't make it. And I'm basically drawing pictures in a notebook and texting them to him, and he's calling me during it, and the whole thing was basically directed by cell phone, and Ryan really did a great job on it. And Marty and Ryan and I spent some time putting it together, and the final result was really what we wanted.
I think. Go ahead.
Oh, it's a very intimate look at firefighter training. It is, people think of it with things that are burning or things that are falling down, or what the fire asylum does is very much get inside the head and work on the where the firefighter is at that moment in time. And anyway, if you've watched it, you can understand that the firefighters really do go through this kind of training quite a bit, and it helps them quite a lot.
Right. It's basically for those of you who I think should see it. It's a firefighter school to the highest degree, and I think what they do is before you learn how to fight a fire, you need to fight the demons inside. It deals with the psychological coming actually before the physical, because I do know, like police officers, firefighters, even though they have a passion to help people, they deal with a lot of guilt and fear and even pride, because it's not that every time you go in to fight a fire, everyone is saved and everything is fine. I mean, these guys, they're like war heroes. I mean, I never realized until I watched the show how some of the things you have to deal with that you never assume is a collapsing floor. I mean, you're fighting a fire and the floor collapses on you, or you have somebody in a hole that you have to try to pull out without, breaking their neck. I mean, you have to be a special person, and I think you did a great service there. I think a lot of people,
thank you,
should do that. I think they appreciate someone when they rescue them. But I went to firefighting school myself.
Oh, you
I
did?
And I went to 3 days training in the Navy. I had to go into what was called, all kinds of training. I went into a smokehouse where it was burning logs and I couldn't breathe. I went into another place where there was a huge oil fire and I was number one hostman. The problem with my name, Acerno, is they would always say, okay, we're gonna start learning about this, and we'll take let's start with the alphabet. We'll get the first guy, Acerno. And I'd always be the number one guy to be the guy that everybody learned through his mistakes not to do. So I understand how that is, but that was a wonderful film. Let's talk a little bit about another great film I've just seen, Mr. North. I mean, Paul, have you seen Mr. North yet?
I haven't. I said, just before we go into that, I do want to hear about it. I was a police chaplain for 5 years. And see, they told there, one of the more dramatic things I remember doing was counseling a police officer who'd had to cut down a 14-year-old boy who had hanged himself. And just to go through the various steps of how to make sense of how to respond. You can't make sense of that, but how to respond. So along parallel lines, and police are very much under scrutiny right now, and that's appropriate. But any of these civil servants, whether they're police or firefighters or whoever, really cannot be taken for granted. There's a heavy toll in those things.
Right.
Yeah.
So Hunter, Paul Hunter did a film called Mr. North, and you have to watch it. I mean, you've got some top stars here. You got Lauren Bacall.
Yep.
Robert Mitchum. It's directed, or is it produced by John Huston?
It was directed by him.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about a great Samuel Goldwyn Productions.
Yep.
And of course, the greatest star is Hunter Carson. But no, this is a great movie. I mean, it's such a heartwarming film. I mean, can you find any sweeter film? And yet it wasn't corny in any way. It just had he's just a sweet guy. And I wish I could meet more people like Mr. North, you know. And what
Mm.
was it like to work with some of those people, Hunter?
It was absolutely lovely. I'll tell you, I did know Angelica Houston before that film. She was a friend of our family's, and she was absolutely fabulous. What a wonderful, wonderful movie that was. Working with Anthony Edwards, always when you're in a movie as a child with a bunch of grown-ups, you know what I mean? There's always a little bit of an interaction, and that you have to get through because there's grown-ups and there's kids. And so Anthony didn't have any of that. It's like the first thing he did was come up and just start talking, and we hung out a little bit. And you know working with I feel honestly very blessed to have worked with the canon of directors that I've worked with. In such a short period of time in my life, I've moved on from acting to work with these folks. It was great. Mr. North was lovely. It was a great concept from the beginning. It was a heartwarming tale. We were sequestered in Rhode Island. All of those houses and all of those things are quite real. The parts that I was filming, none of that was a stage at all. All of those were real, beautiful houses that we worked in, worked out of, worked around. And the people of Rhode Island were just welcoming as all can get out. They really enjoyed having us there. And at one point, I remember they even gave us a big clam bake, which if you've never been to a clam bake, it is quite a treat. And they do it right, up there. Had a great time. It's a film that everybody can watch. It's a film that everyone can enjoy a bit of. It's got beautiful set dressing, if that's what you're into. Visuals are gorgeous. The acting was quite good. Directing was off the charts. And it was just what a pleasurable project to be on, and it also, and I'd like to reflect in one way, I wasn't the centerpiece of the story. My character wasn't the centerpiece of the story, which was great for me because it allowed me to really be a working actor rather than the centerpiece of what was going on in the film. Harry Dean was also in that movie, and I'm sure that he had no small role in getting me into that film.
Uh-huh. And then to the opposite, the opposite part of the spectrum, you go from, you have a film like Mr. North, which is a heartwarming, wonderful, sweet film. You go right to a whole nother level with Paris, Texas. I mean, there is reality if you ever saw it. Raw, disturbing, sad, and yet, for a lot of people, that's a real life experience. And I got to say, I thought your acting in that film, I mean, Mr. North and Invaders from Mars, very good. But when you did Paris, Texas, you were right on. I mean, I can't imagine a young kid being more real. I mean, you played that part so real. I guess, I got to say, I think if Steven Spielberg himself were to find a kid. No, really, because he's the excellent one doing E.T. and all those things.
Right.
I think if he saw you play that part, he said that's the kid for the part because you did it. You did a superb job on that.
Thank you. That was a beautiful film. I kind of have a question. Have both y'all seen this of Paris, Texas? Have both y'all watched Paris, Texas?
Yeah, I have.
Well, my question would be then, if you've seen it, do you think, and this is a real personal question, I mean this, do you think that the character of Travis made the right decision at the end of the film to drive away?
Yeah, that's a hard one, isn't it? Yeah, I think that I think it's not so much what I think. I think the character thought he had fulfilled what he always wanted to do. He seems to have been a loner and cared, but he couldn't deal with it. He just was the kind of guy. He's a very difficult guy to read. He could be emotional and sweet and loving, and then very distant and almost like, you feel like, don't you have any concerns? But we don't. My take is that we don't really know if he ever came back. It could be too that he left and said, "You look, the kid's been with me for a while. Now he needs to be with her for a while. Let me kind of bow out, and I'll come back later." But I don't know. What do you think? What's your feelings, Hunter?
I think that it was the only reasonable way for the character of Jane and the character of Hunter to actually have a life together. I think that the acknowledgement that Travis had at the very end of watching his, the two people that he loved, the only two people he loved on Earth, get together, I think that there was the acknowledgement that if he had stayed, he looks at them from that parking lot. I think he's realizing that if he had stayed, that it may go back to the way that it was. And that was dangerous for everyone. I mean, the way that he described the emotional state that he was in when Hunter was young and when Jane was, when they were all living together in the trailer, I think he kind of realizes that he's not ready for that, but that they are, and that his role was to bring them back together because he was the one that tore them apart. And I think that was the first time that the character of Travis found his inner strength.
Yeah.
That the character of Travis was afraid of everything, walking through the desert. I mean, there's so many layers to that movie. We're going forever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Going through the desert and all that, and realizing that there was some humanity left in him, that the humanity that was left in him needed to remain with him instead of being spread to Jane and Hunter. So that would be my answer. But, that's just me.
And then we get to, of course, everybody's waiting also to get to Invaders from Mars. And aren't you happy?
Yeah, Ralph.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I didn't know, Paul. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to ask. This is another segue into Invaders from Mars, but these early film roles were also in many ways not dependent on maybe, but related to your parents. Your father was a co-writer on the script for Paris, Texas, right?
Correct.
And then you acted with your mother in Invaders from Mars. What was that like? I mean, we've talked to people who've been kid actors, if you will, but to start off in movie acting with your parents as part of the whole picture. What was that like for you?
Well, it was interesting. It was very much a working relationship on set. And then, you'd have to go transform back into a family when work was done. Working with, my dad was writing. So that was his focus. I mean, he was writing. He used to use an old typewriter, and you could hear him in his trailer whacking away at the keys as he was writing the script on paper. And so, but that was his style, that was the accepted style when you work with my dad. That was the accepted style. He would work on the script as it was being shot. Chainsaw had, and I'm sequitoring and I'll come right back. Chainsaw had, if you've ever seen a movie script, it has multiple colored pages. By the time they were done shooting Chainsaw, they had run out of colors, and they were shooting in Austin, and they were using weird colors that they were making to have new pages of the script, because that's how they did it. But let me get back to Invaders. Working with my mom was great. And most of the time she was out acting me. That was okay. I think that was probably good. And you go from set as a family, then you're working, and then you go home as a family, and then you're a family. So there was a bit of an interesting, psychological change from working together on a scene and then, going home and having to get up the next day and go back to work, So it was a nice relationship. It was comforting for me as a child to have my parents there on set. Many child actors have guardians or things like that so that their parents can do whatever it is that their parents are doing, And of course, my parents were on set, so I didn't need a guardian. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Nice transition. I really, really enjoyed that. Was well done. Thank you.
Did you watch the original film before you made the remake?
Yes, Toby.
What did you think about that? What did you think about that?
I really liked it. Toby sat us down and watched it. I really liked the original film. There's something to be said for remakes or, reboots as they call them, or, the third category is, of course, a sequel. I liked the original film of Invaders from Mars. It was well done. It wasn't entirely for me that scary in a way, because when I'm thinking about other films that were from that era, I did get quite scared watching things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That movie scared me quite a bit when I was a kid. Invaders from Mars wasn't really that scary, and for me, looking at it, even as a 10-year-old, I was working on getting into the role of David Gardner, and I don't know if you know this, but the original actor that played David Gardner in the first film was in the second film. He was one of the police officers at the school. I don't know if you guys know that.
I remember that.
Yes, he was one of the police officers at the school. And obviously, I talked to him and chatted with him. We had some time together. It's nice watching something that you're about to do. You know what I mean? There is some solace in knowing that they've got it done once, and now we're going to go do it again in our own way. So it was quite fun. What did you think of the original Invaders from Mars?
I thought it was captivating. I don't know how I would say it was scary, but I thought it was very, very tense. And I think it touches into an archetypal thing for kids that grown-ups won't necessarily believe you, even though you're telling the truth. And I think that's a critical part of the story. That the believability of the kid who's absolutely right, and for much of the film up until his mother, or not his mother but the nurse, is trying to help him, nobody believes him, and I think that's an archetypal experience, and I think every kid has had that experience. Maybe not something so drastic, of course, but where you're trying to explain something to your parents, and they just don't listen. They just don't understand.
Yeah.
And I think that gives the story a universal arc to it.
Steven Spielberg said when he saw the original film, it was the scariest film he ever saw. He said, because if there's one thing a kid trusts, it's his parents. And when your parents become aliens, that is really scary. But, I thought the music in the original film was outstanding. And we had Jerry Mathers from Leave It to Beaver. And I said, I thought that the reason the show was such a success is you really felt you're seeing the world through a child's eyes, through Beaver's eyes, rather than some adult that's making the production. And so I think the Invaders from Mars is supposed to be a dream, isn't it really? I mean, he wakes up and then...
a foreshadowing dream. Yeah.
A foreshadowing of a dream. And your second film, I thought, was... It made that even more apparent. I mean, there was that it almost seemed like your film was going at 90%. The way people talked and the dreamy music in the kitchen. Like, la, 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 it just had that effect very much, that you're in a kind of a semi-reality, and you pulled it off wonderfully. I mean, go ahead, Paul.
Hunter, did you know the short story "The Room in the Tower" by the Victorian writer E.F. Benson?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
It's a prototype of all of these stories.
Oh, really?
Where the character has this terrible dream, and at the end he wakes up from the dream, and then all of a sudden finds he's in the dream is beginning to unfold in reality. And there was a British film back in the 40s called Dead of Night, which used that same device.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very effective one. And I don't know that anybody who was working on either of the versions of Invaders from Mars was thinking of the room in the tower, but it's an archetypal kind of story. And I think the line in the short story is the narrator is visiting a friend, and the friend's mother or somebody says to him, "My son will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." And this dream recurs, and he finally wakes up from it. And of course, at the end of the story, he's going to visit a friend, and sure enough, there's the woman. Same thing. I've given you the room in the tower, and it's now going to happen in real life out of the dream. And I think that's profoundly disturbing, but also profoundly real.
David, I also know that
he's Hunter, Ralph.
I'm sorry?
He's Hunter. David is the character.
Did I say David? I'm
You
sorry.
did.
I'm thinking of David. Yeah, I'm thinking of Invaders from Mars. Hunter, I know you have a strong faith that is wonderful, and it seems like it's continued to carry you into your into your years as you move along. Has that always been true of you? And can you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey of spirituality?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I think that I've always had a strong faith, and purposefully given in a way. I'll be very candid. I think that the more that I learned about the Gospels and about the Old Testament and about the Bible as a whole, were strengthening to me. That was given to me at a young age. I did attend 5 years of Catholic school, 2 different schools. And obviously the religious studies program is part of that. And, it's one of those things that I had in me, when I was younger. And then I left for sure for a while and just sort of didn't do anything about it. I'm talking about when I'm in my 20s and in college, and I have, a lot of things that are going on that a young person does that, don't necessarily mean that you're going to church. Most of what I gleaned in that era, late teens, early 20s, and into my 30s, was that I was always so appreciative of the way that Lent happened. I'm a huge fan of that. I'm a bit of an ascetic myself, and I appreciate the fact that giving something up, whatever that is, can give us strength. So, I would continue Lent, even though I wasn't really going to that many church services. Obviously Easter and Christmas became really the main focal point because, you're going with your parents when I would go with my parents when I'm in my 20s, and then, truly when I was in my 30s, I fell in love, and, kids. And when you go through marriage preparation and baptism preparation, it kind of reinvigorated me. So I would say that, my faith was good when I was young, perhaps around enough when I was in my 20s that it gave me strength, and then sort of flourished and blossomed with the arrival of our kids. And I would say that seeing children grow through a father's eyes is like no other experience I've ever had. It's beautiful. but it's also a very faithful journey for me. It really opened up my eyes to the fact that when I was speaking, you know, I would make references to things that I knew about that were scripture, and that were faith-based. Um, and, you know, that sort of discussions with little kids can be awkward and at times. And so really I'm like discovering how to talk about my personal faith with my family's faith and integrate all five of us, you know, into a close relationship with Jesus, which I believe that I have. And you know, it's just like getting all that energy together from those kids and watching them sort of figure out what real faith can be, and that's their journey. But I think that my journey has definitely flourished recently, and at the past 10 years of having a family has made that very possible. Thank you for that question. Good stuff.
That's very it's very wonderful to hear. Paul, did you have any comment?
Yeah, no, I think that's very commendable and very important. And I think what I take from these films, whether especially like Invaders from Mars and many others, is they're what I would call in the Bible cautionary tales. Many of Jesus' parables are ways of saying, "Watch out for this." He talks about the rich man who ignores the Lazarus who is the beggar at his gate, pays him no attention. He talks about the other rich man who wants to build bigger and bigger barns for all of his many crops and his many riches, and that these people will come to terrifying ends. And so I think these films, in a broad way, should remind people that there's a reality of life that is far more than the physical and the material, and that at least maybe opens the door for the gospel.
I really like that. I want to bring that back to the little kid who has faith. You know, the David Gardner has faith that he has really seen this, you know, whether this is a dreamscape or not. And that is, and obviously I didn't think about that when I was doing the role, but that was what was motivating him. Do you notice how David Gardner's character keeps getting told, no, thanks. No, I'm not interested in what you're saying. That's cute, kid. And then his strength comes from the fact that he continues to search. So, you know, there is a search going on. There's always searching talked about by Jesus. I'm saying this in an awkward way, but he's constantly talking about searching. You're searching and finding, searching and finding. But I love that cautionary tale that you just said. It's very true. If when we get lost, we can definitely end up getting eaten by monsters.
Okay.
What was it like working with Toby Hoover?
Toby's great. Toby's knew me from. Toby's one of our family friends. I knew Toby my whole life. He was great. He was very specific about what was going on. I mean, he had his fingers on every bit of what was going on in that frame. And he really enjoyed the actors working together quite a bit. He really wanted the actors to get where they wanted to go in the scene. And you know, what we were working towards was his vision, and working with a director like that who has a vision and knows what it is makes the actor's job much simpler because there's a guidance there. You know, Toby is a wonderful guide. He's a bit of a kid. I'll tell you something. You know, when I was younger, of course, I shouldn't even say when I was younger, I like video games. I still play video games, mostly mobile. But, you know, when you're a kid and you've got a lot of downtime, you know, I had a video game console, and Toby would come and play video games with me. He was very much in tune. He was very much in touch with his childish side. I can remember playing video games with Toby, and he was making the sound effects that the games where that was happening on the games. You know what I mean? He was really enjoying it. Toby was so full of life. He really enjoyed all of the little bits and pieces of life. And of course, he loved making movies. Just absolutely adored making movies. His house had props in it, had his movie props in it. So as you walk in the door, you go down a long hallway. This is the house that I remember. You go down a long hallway, and he had posters of his movies and props that he had, and props from other films. I'm sure that he had some stuff from the original Invaders that I can't recall at this moment in time, but he loved memorabilia. That was one of his big things. And so, he was always a dedicated filmmaker, and I think the joy of filmmaking for him was very childish in the best possible way.
Did he have a big television set in the house?
Lots.
Right. I've been a fan of horror and sci-fi films for years, and I got kind of turned off in the 70s to like The Exorcist and things like that. And I deliberately didn't choose to go see Texas Chainsaw because it just sounded just so grisly. But later on, I was in grad school, and I was in a course doing film studies where they showed the film, and I remember being much more impressed by it. And the idea of raising the question of what is normal, a normal family. And I think that shows up in so many of his films. And I think we can delude ourselves through sin to think that the abnormal is normal. And then we excuse the sin. I know I haven't seen all of his films. I know there's one he has about space vampires and things like that sound kind of encouraging. But I think that's whether that's Invaders from Mars or whether it's Texas Chainsaw or whether it's Poltergeist. I think it's all that you have that recurring sense of what is normal and trying to convince yourself that something is normal when it really isn't, and part of why David is rejected in Invaders from Mars is what he's saying is so obviously not normal, but it's real.
So, Hunter, we are looking forward to having you come back with us for a show that we're going to deal with on another type of invasion of the body snatchers. And we're going to have Billy Gray join us from the epic film Day the Earth Stood Still. So, Paul, do you have any closing words for Hunter?
No, I just said it's been a delight talking to you, Hunter.
Thank you. I'm having a great time.
Does that issue of normal versus abnormal, did that make sense to you from your experience with Toby?
Oh, absolutely. I hadn't really reflected on that, but I think you're right. Toby's from Texas, and his whole impetus behind the Chainsaw movies was very much being upset at Christmas time. And I'll tell you that story later, whenever you want.
You're a kindred spirit, and we love you, and thank you again for coming on, and we wish you every best success for you and your family as you move forward.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Until next time, this is Ralph with 10 Times the Terror.
And I'm Paul.
And we will catch you real soon. Take care, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Well, you're well intentioned, but clearly wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.